creator of Dry It Can It. I'm not a professional, I'm a homemaker, but I like to share tips and tricks that I have for using dehydrated foods, canned foods, and freeze-dried foods, as well as original recipes that I've come up with. And today I have one that I think I'm really excited about. Recently, maybe a couple weeks ago, I used some of my powdered squash, winter squash. We just hydrated it with hot water and had squash as a side dish, and it was good. And I've also used this for making soup by adding broth and onion and whatever else you want to add to it. But I started wondering, what can I make with the powdered squash besides just soup or squash? And more recently, at least at the time that this is being recorded, eggs have become in short supply, and they've also become more expensive. I needed a side dish recently, and I decided to try and experiment with an eggless cornbread. And so what I have come up with and what's working really well is basically a cornmeal squash cornbread. And it worked really, really well. The texture is really well, it works really well, and you can put the whole thing together in maybe 5 to 7 minutes. So I want to share with you what I did if you're interested in this. I used freeze-dried squash this time, but this recipe will work equally well with dehydrated squash, as long as it's a winter squash, or freeze-dried squash. You simply want to dehydrate it or freeze-dry it and powder it. I started by taking 1 cup of the powdered squash, and to that I added 1 cup of hot water, stirred it really well, and put it aside to let it rehydrate. Just make sure that it's all mixed really well. I turned my oven on to 375 degrees, and I greased the bottom of my pan. I happen to use a 9x9 pan. Could use a round pan or a different size if you wanted to. In a separate bowl, I mixed some dry ingredients. I wrote down my recipe so I wouldn't lose track of it here. So I took 1 cup of cornmeal, 1 cup of regular flour, 1 tablespoon of baking powder. Now I know that seems like a lot, but keep in mind that there's no eggs in this recipe, and that baking powder will help this rise. And then a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Mix that together just a little bit with a fork. And then I added a 1/4 cup of sugar just for a little bit of sweetness. You could probably leave the sugar out if you want, but I think it's going to taste more plain. Then, once I had my dry ingredients in a bowl, I added my rehydrated squash on top of the dry ingredients. I added 1 cup of milk. I happen to use whole milk this time, but you can use any kind of milk you want. If you want to use an almond milk or an oat milk, I don't think that that's going to make any difference. Then I used a 1/4 cup of Crisco oil. You could probably use butter if you wanted. That'd probably be a little bit richer, but I chose to use oil in this. And then I mixed all that up, basically, and had a batter. I put this in the pan, I baked it at 375 degrees, and I came out with a really good cornbread cake. Now, you could do this in a couple of different ways. You could add some bacon bits to this and bake it for breakfast if you were going to have that. You definitely could add some jalapeno peppers or even some corn if you wanted this to be a side dish for dinner. But what a great way to sneak some vegetables into breakfast for your kids, or have a breakfast alternative without using eggs. So if I put a little butter and syrup on this, I think I have a breakfast. This cake is good. It's not overly moist. It's not overly dry. It tastes like cornbread. What I don't really taste in it is the squash. I thought maybe the sweetness of the squash would come through, and it didn't. But it's a good recipe, and I think it's a great alternative for breakfast or a side dish. So if you want to use your powdered squash in a new way, create a side dish, create an eggless breakfast, this is the way to go. I will also post the recipe down below. I do ask that you please subscribe to my channel, thumbs up if you like the video. That tells me that you want more recipes. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.